Good afternoon, hello. Welcome to this CIVITAS Living Labs on Stage, the third live event of this conference series. My name is Tim Durant. I work for a company called Vectos. We've been very pleased to be involved in two of the Living Lab projects, Destinations and Portis. I've particularly been involved in the Portis project, and we'll also be hearing from the Eccentric project this afternoon. We have actually four presenters who will be talking about 6 measures, and these are measures and initiatives in the cities that have been successfully upscaled in their city as a result of these projects, of the Living Lab projects, or have been replicated to other cities. So really looking forward to hearing about these measures from the presenters. I would just like to start by guiding you through how the session will be run today in my role as moderator, and then we'll get started with the cities very shortly. So thank you for joining us, and we'll make a start with the presentations. So for those who haven't joined any of the other live sessions before, I'd just like to give you an overview that first of all, earlier in October, we had the CIVITAS Projects in a Nutshell session. This involved an overview of the projects. In our live session 2 on the 13th of October, we talked about the impacts that have been achieved by some of the measures implemented in the Living Labs. And now we're moving on to live session 3 to understand we've been undertaking these pilots of different measures, and how are these now being taken and upscaled by the cities and also shared and exchanged with other cities in terms of replication. After the session that I'm moderating through till 4 o'clock, there will also be the final closing conference session. So please, we have 2 hours of great information and news from the projects for you this afternoon. So just to provide a quick introduction now. So in terms of the session today, we'll be talking about how the cities have taken their ideas that they introduced 4 years ago at the beginning of the projects, and have worked through in order to make those a reality in their cities, and with a particular focus on those that are now being scaled up and replicated, as I said. The innovation aspect has been there all through. I've been the innovation manager in the Portis project, and we've seen aspects of organizational innovation, improved mobility forums, working with stakeholders, working with the public, as well as technical aspects of innovation. But as a wise colleague of mine often says, the innovation is great, but with the solutions that we're introducing, we really want to see the scaling up of these in the cities and the wider take up by people. So that's our focus for the session today. Of course, it's important to bear in mind that we refer to these projects as laboratories in some ways, but that suggests something that's tests and pilots that are happening in very controlled conditions. And of course, we know that that's not really the case. So there's really an emphasis on the living aspects of the laboratories here. Alongside the projects that have been undertaken within CIVITAS, the cities have the other investments in sustainable mobility infrastructure, which are complementary to that in the projects. Of course, we've seen outside influences as well during the project duration. There's been a major wave of micromobility investment during this time scale. So during the project meetings we've had increasing discussions around those aspects as well. So the cities have really been responding as they've worked through the project. And of course, now in 2020, it's been a very different year because of the COVID-19 pandemic, and we'll be touching on aspects of that in the presentations as well, and the effects that has had on some of the measures. So to move on and give an overview of the solutions that will be presented today by representatives from the different projects. We have, first of all, from Destinations, Panos Koreanakis will be joining us from CRPM. He'll be talking about two measures from Destinations, a measure to do with scaling within a city, the successful scheme of the shared bike system in Las Palmas on Gran Canaria. We'll also be hearing about replication of the tourism and local business partnerships from Panos. So welcome to Panos. From the Eccentric project, we also have two measures, one with scaling and one with replication. So I'd like to welcome Mari Angelina Evliati from Stockholm. She'll be talking about her work on the EV charging plan for Stockholm and how they're going to be taking that further. And then also for Stella Altunen from Turku. Hello, Stella, welcome. Who'll be talking about mobility as a service and how they've been taking that forward in the city of Turku. So great lineup there. And then last but not least, I'd like to welcome Dirk Engels as well from TML. Hello, Dirk. So Dirk will be talking about a couple of measures from Portis. First of all, the great impact that the project has had in Constanza in terms of their work on the reallocation of street space for active and shared modes in Constanza, and also replication. And there have been a couple of measures relating to commuter travel planning in Aberdeen and Antwerp that have been covered by the project. So we'll be hearing more about that. So great that the presenters could join us, and we'll quickly get onto these presentations now. After those presentations, we'll have a panel discussion. So we'd like to just then, in terms of the scaling at the city level of these measures, we'd like to cover the role that different actors are playing, the city, how they're engaged, how citizens are also being engaged, and then the private sector involvement and collaboration as well. And then also looking at how the cities within the Living Labs have been looking to exchange their knowledge and their experiences with cities outside the projects as well. So we'll come on to that a little bit more in a discussion at the end of the session. So just to make participants aware, we are recording this session, and in fact all the live sessions are made available on the Living Labs on Stage website. And unfortunately, our participants today aren't able to ask questions directly, but we would encourage you, in fact, to ask your questions using the relevant questions portal there. And please, if you could direct your questions to one or other person, that would be helpful for us, so that we can make sure they're addressed during the session. We will have the presentations from our representatives here, and then after each presentation we'll have a 5-minute for questions and answers, where we'll try and pick out one or two of the questions to cover those during the session. So that's all from me in terms of an introduction. So we'd like to move on then to the first of our project presentations from Panos, who will be covering the two measures that I described from destinations. So thanks, Panos, and the floor is yours for our first installment today. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Tim. Let me share my screen with you, and I think that I hope you can see my screen now.
Yes.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Panos Korogiannakis. I am the destinations manager and responsible for communications and dissemination. And I will talk to you today about the achievements of the project regarding scaling and exporting successful solutions. In terms of scalability, I will talk to you about the Cicicleta shared mobility project in Las Palmas de Gran Canaria. And then I will come back to you and talk to you about our replicability and replication activities. Let me first start by saying that Las Palmas de Gran Canaria had an old bike sharing system, and that system unfortunately was not successful. It had technical problems, vandalism, poor planning, and financial difficulties. As a result, in 2016, in Las Palmas, a new strategy was developed for a new bike sharing scheme following a new business model. And I emphasize the word new business model, very important. The design and implementation lasted a couple of years, from 2016 to 2018. And in 2018, 375 smart bikes were made available to the public, as well as 20 e-bikes with an onboard computer as a pilot, the e-bikes as a pilot to promote cycling between the hilly parts of the city. They were all docked in 42 new stations that could accommodate 520 bike racks. Now, what is important to see is that most of the rentals are with membership. 86% of the users use some kind of membership. More than 40,000 users in 2 years. 89% of the users use the mobile app, and the average time of the journey was in 2019 23 minutes, and it was a very high acceptance from tourists as well. 32% of the users of the system were tourists. Here is the growth of the system in the 2 years 2018-2019. I will discuss 2020 in a minute, but the growth of the system in the 2 years, the first 2 years of operation, covered more than 1 million kilometers and saved 192 tons of CO2. Now, in 2020, inevitably there was a problem with COVID-19, and during the first phase of the lockdown in Las Palmas de Gran Canaria, only 50% of the bikes remained in the system, and during the 2 weeks of the full lockdown, only a quarter of the bikes was made available. The demand fell dramatically down to 5% of pro-COVID-19 outbreak, and after the lockdown, the demand came back up to about 70% of the peak. And of course, as you can imagine, there is grave concern now with the resurgence of the epidemic, how the new COVID-19 restrictions will impact the utilization of the system. Now, in terms of the motto of Las Palmas de Gran Canaria is success allows growth, and therefore the system is now being scaled up in 2020 and 2021. Are plans for 5 new stations and for increase in the electric part by opening 5 new e-bike stations in the hilly part of the city. The new app is being developed to replace the Next Bike app that is in use at the moment, and new revenue streams are envisaged, and that's a very important element because private companies are invited to sponsor Cicicleta. For example, the big supermarkets in the city, they are putting ads on the bike and they pay for these ads, providing additional revenue stream. Another revenue stream that is envisaged during the scaling up phase of the project is the monetization of user data collected and sold to other customers, of course respecting GDPR, but they may be sold to other customers or other businesses. So we see that the city of Las Palmas de Gran Canaria has carefully selected the scaling up mode. I just want to say that there were a number of lessons learned, including the engagement of key stakeholders that is absolutely necessary for the success of the system, to the communication activities, the communication program to inform, and also the fact that it is absolutely necessary to take into account the shape and the urban structure of the city where the bike sharing system is being implemented. Now, a couple of other things regarding scalability. Las Palmas de Gran Canaria decided to start small and to set realistic milestones and goals. The progressive deployment of the system was necessary. Not all stations at once were deployed. Second point, the EU funding is the tool to overcome high initial investment costs and test the business model before scaling it up. Third point, build a trust relationship with the system provider. They have to adapt to your needs. And fourth, foster collaboration with other cities, learn from each other, and try to really implement the system in the best possible way. In Las Palmas de Gran Canaria, Lanzarote, Bilbao, San Sebastian, and the University of Malta were close collaborators. Now coming to the replication and replicability, I will present to you under the theme of tourism and local business partnerships to promote sustainable mobility, 3 of the successful measures of destinations: the Green Hotel Awards in Limassol in Cyprus, the Mobility and Accommodation Package in Elba, and the hoteliers as public transport ambassadors in Madeira. Starting with some basic principles regarding our replication program, I'll say that we had a strong mandate at destinations to promote sustainable mobility beyond the 6 destinations islands from the very beginning. The principles of our replication and communication program was to reach as many people as possible with the project results, including cities in China such as Beijing and Shenzhen. The second principle was to adopt early on a win-win approach where sustainable tourism goes hand in hand with sustainable mobility. The tools we used was the CIVITAS webpage, newsletters, social media, print and TV media, but one of the main tools for our replication program was the destinations platform of followers. The platform has 220 registered users, more than 90 articles, and was the springboard of replication activities. These activities were carried out in 2 rounds of funded and unfunded replication, and today we have 8 successful applicants that are outside the project in cities all around Europe. 3 of them are funded replication actions and 5 unfunded that have been supported and successfully completed. In Limassol, there was a very high stakeholders involvement from the beginning. The hoteliers introduced a mobility card to the guests, training staff to promote the mobility card, tourist businesses, thematic parks, bike sharing companies, they provide discounts as an incentive for tourists to use the mobility card. Today, we have 22 businesses offering discounts for the adoption of the mobility card and 16 hotels participating in the program. Hoteliers recognized early on and rewarded, and they were rewarded with a Green Hotel Award. The impact of this action was that there was a win-win situation between transport and tourism, including hoteliers and related businesses. The tourists benefit from comfortable and low-cost opportunities. The hotels are promoted as socially responsible, attracting guests interested in environmental protection. The city benefits from less traffic, less noise, and a more attractive environment. And of course, there is strong interest in replication from other cities and islands, such as the island of Korčula in Croatia, that has developed an implementation plan to contributing to the development of sustainable tourism activities in the whole of the Republic of Croatia. They established a working relationship between the island hotels and the bus company. Tourists enabled usage of special bus transport prices and allowed easier mobility across the island. 2 mobile applications allow for easier access to the information on the public transport, bus fare discounts, and purchase over the mobile app. They have also established a bike sharing system within the hotels and the local authorities. the island is today recognized as environmentally friendly. Now, the second measure, successful measure, that was developed by on the island of Elba, involves two of the Elba communities, Porto Ferraio and Rio, that provided practical and financial support to hoteliers for the activation of a long-term rental of electric bikes for their customers. One rental operator was selected, and 11 accommodation facilities on the island have been selected to participate in the program, receiving 40 electric bikes that have been rented and made at the disposal of their customers to go around the island without using a car or any other mode of transport. The impact of this replication action, which we call again a win-win approach, is basically the payment of full rental costs. With the payment of the full rental costs, the municipalities were able to involve a greater number of accommodation facilities and give the tourists the opportunity for more sustainable modes of transport on the island. In terms of replication, the Irish island of Cape Clear had expressed from the beginning an interest in replicating this action. They are registered users of the platform of followers, and was one of the many successful applicants. The island developed a plan to combine products for tourism and mobility that integrate sustainable transport within a broad spectrum of services, using an electric van that is supplied by the Irish Transport Authority, and that translates into the successful implementation of the Elba mobility and accommodation package. The expected impact for the island of Cape Clear is, first of all, the good engagement of the community and learn from the CIVITAS initiative and the destinations partners with whom they've been in contact, and they transfer the mobility and accommodation package concepts and practicalities to the island. In Madeira, cross-sector business partnerships to establish win-win agreements to promote sustainable transport modes involves the engagement of hoteliers as public transport ambassadors and the partnerships with businesses to promote the use of public transport. 27 businesses are part of the initiative, and the tourists now are more satisfied with the service and are using more public transport services for the travels. The hotels and businesses were very receptive of this approach. Tourism stakeholders understood from the beginning the economic value of a city improving the tourist experience through sustainable mobility. And last but not least, businesses understood the economic potential of such collaboration. With these few words, I want to thank you and conclude my presentation. You can see on this page the contacts that you can have with the 4 islands involved for further information. Thank you again.
Thank you very much, Panos. Really excellent presentation. There was a lot of information packed into your slides there. I thought some really good, interesting points on the bike sharing scheme, how CIVITAS provided some really good front-end investment in order to get the scheme up and running, and your points about starting small and then scaling up was really good. So it's good to hear that scheme will be further increased in the future, including the e-bikes as well, and then also with the tourism initiatives as well, working with the hoteliers, providing that information for people as they arrive. And I thought that there is also the e-bike rental scheme, allowing people to hold onto a bike for a whole week, for instance, during their visit. Sounds like a really nice initiative as well. So thanks very much for sharing those with us. I'm just checking for questions, and I don't think we've had any questions yet from our attendees. So I'd encourage participants to add any questions they do have. I just have one question for you in relation to the the bike sharing scheme, you mentioned that there's 32% usage by tourists of the scheme based on the evaluation, which is, so it's great to hear that you're hitting that target group. But clearly there's a lot of other usage by local residents as well. I wondered if you had any figures on the demographic groups or people that are using the scheme other than tourists.
Well, first of all, let me say that Las Palmas de Gran Canaria is a touristic destination all around the year. So tourists are on the island 12 months every year. That means that the demand for tourists, from tourists, is quite stable all across the year. What we do know is that the tourists in Las Palmas de Gran Canaria, the demographics are 50% men, 50% women, average age 44 years. And we also know that they stay on the island for not just 3 or 4 days, not for a long weekend, but they stay longer. And we see that, for example, 67% of the system utilization is through annual subscription fees. So people don't use the bike or the e-bike for just one journey or for one day, but particularly, of course, the local populations, mostly, they rent year-round. 2 out of 3 users, they use it all the time. And this is why the mileage was so high for the first 2 years of operation. 2020, of course, as I showed, it will be less of a mileage for the year because of the epidemic, but hopefully by 2021, the system will be up and running in full capacity again.
Okay, thank you, Panos, for the additional context there and information. It's very helpful. Just checking again. Oh, wait, 1 second. We do have a question that's come in. I'll just read this out to you, Panos. Did they also target cruise tourists, in particular in Gran Canaria, as these are often hard to reach, being offered packages before they get to their destination? This is coming from the city of Trieste, who have a question about this as well, and how you reach out to the cruise passengers.
I think that in many of our islands, not only Las Palmas de Gran Canaria, but I also mentioned here Funchal in Madeira, the public transport company has made a super effort to go and interview these arriving tourists at the cruise terminal and understand their transportation needs. And in fact, the city of Funchal has now purchased 5 electric buses that were purchased with ERDF funding, sort of unlocking additional investment outside the project. And one of these buses is dedicated to go around the cruise terminal to take cruise ship tourists around the city, and therefore avoid the traditional mode of operation, renting a car and going around. This has been a very successful measure and is based on the fact that the public transport company was very proactive to go and interview the arriving tourists at the cruise terminal and understand their needs.
Okay, thanks, Panos. So in this case, the electric buses have been used in order to collect the cruise passengers, and perhaps that provides an opportunity to provide them more information on the other sustainable mobility options they have on the islands.
Not all of them. One of them, there is a special journey that has been designed specifically. So one of the electric buses, the other 4 are in regular service around the hills of Funchal. Madeira is a volcanic island, and small electric buses is a very convenient and clean way to move both citizens and tourists around the city.
Okay, thanks very much. Yes, okay. We're just on time now to move to our presenters from Eccentric. So we'll have, as I mentioned earlier, we'll have two presentations from Eccentric. So first we'll have Maria-Angelina presenting from Stockholm. Maria-Angelina is a project manager for clean vehicles at the City of Stockholm. She has an MSc in Sustainable Urban Planning and Design from KTH, the Royal Institute of Technology. So first of all, I'd like to welcome Maria-Angelina to yes, present on the EV upscaling in Stockholm. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tim. I hope you can hear me and you can see my presentation. Let me just remove this box here. And so my name is Maria-Angelina Viliati. I'm a project manager and work package leader for clean vehicles working in the city of Stockholm and currently broadcasting from the Swedish countryside. So let me take you to Stockholm and tell you about the charging plan we implemented during Eccentric. Very briefly about Stockholm, it's the capital of Sweden, 1 million inhabitants, and it's built on 14 islands. In 2010, it was awarded the Green Capital Award, and now we are aiming to make Stockholm fossil fuel free by 2040. So wide-scale electrification is very high on the agenda, and this is why we also can see a very rapid rise in electric vehicles in the city of Stockholm, which today makes about 10% of the total car fleet. So the master plan for charging infrastructure, I would say that it describes the approach we have on public charging, where the focus is to roll out charging infrastructure off street, but also on street. We have the concept of charging streets, where we deploy several 6 to 8 normal or fast chargers, and it is based on a public-private partnership where the city of Stockholm signs access rights agreements with the utility providers, and they undertake the investment costs, and they operate the system, they maintain the charging infrastructure, and they also have to provide data to the city. And our goal is to have 4,000 public charging spots by 2022. The second pillar of this work is home charging. Many of you who work with electric vehicles and charging infrastructure know already that electric vehicle users prefer to charge at home, and it's the best way to have charging from an economic point of view, but also from an urban planning perspective. So in Sweden, there has been national funding available for this type of investments, setting up charging infrastructure at home. And during Eccentric, we organized seminars specifically for single and multifamily housing. This is because we know that approximately 50% of Stockholm people, the Stockholm population, lives in multifamily housing. So we organized these seminars where we explained the process. We provided checklists and contact lists on about other multifamily housing associations that have done this work before, and we provided a guide on the steps that you need to take from start to finish, and not only about the steps to take, but also how to apply for the funding that is available in Sweden. Coming to the results of these two measures, when we look at the master plan, first of all, we mapped 3,700 locations in the inner city, as you can see in this map. It's those spots that a group of experts together with other stakeholders in the city of Stockholm mapped based on different criteria, among others, accessibility and width of street and type of urban mix and so on. So these are the locations where utility providers can apply to the city of Stockholm for setting up public charging. Besides that, we have 200 charging spots on street that are up and running in different locations in the city, and we also run approximately 30 seminars with housing associations. And we can see from the survey results that at least 5,000 charging points were either installed or in the process of being installed. However, I would say that most important, besides the numbers and besides the infrastructure that is in place, we've seen an increased demand for charging solutions from citizens. For instance, there is a number of people not having access to own garage, so charging on street is very appreciated, especially in the inner city. And we also saw the development of new services and technology providers, not only in terms of the actual charging infrastructure, but in terms of billing and accounting services, for example. And upscaling for us, I would say it has been a continuous process, in the sense that we throughout the whole project we have refined small details in how we did things. For example, when we look at the collaboration we had with access rights agreements with the utility providers, we started with 5 years of agreements, which we then increased to 10 years. When we look at the information seminars we run, we also started with the multifamily housing, and then we added the single family housing target group. So I would say that we've done the upscaling already throughout the implementation by refining and adjusting what was necessary and what we realized was actually possible and beneficial to do. One very important lesson learned for us has been that as a city we recognized our own role. Working with electric mobility is a new thing, and it's not really in the legislation. So there are many gray zones as to what a city can or cannot do. So this whole process has helped us to actually define this role, which is that of being an enabler, providing the prerequisites to, for example, the private sector that has the technological solutions ready to invest and to take an active role in electrification. And also the role of the neutral information provider. We saw that this was very highly appreciated by people, because there is a lot of information out there, but the city communicating different options was perceived as impartial and very good to have. Last but not least, these two projects resulted in clear processes and business models for setting up public and home charging infrastructure, which I think is almost as important as the results itself. And this has in turn resulted in that many cities in Stockholm, many cities in Sweden and in Europe have been interested or are already replicating those business models. For example, in the master plan for charging infrastructure, we have a couple of cities in Sweden, its neighboring municipalities in Stockholm, and we have Vitoria-Gasteiz in Spain, where we had quite regular contact throughout the spring, going beyond actually reading our deliverables, but we also had a very fruitful exchange, bilateral exchange, really digging into the details on how to map charging appropriate locations for charging points and so on. Information campaign is also something that has been replicated by several cities in Sweden and also in Europe. Now we see that the other municipalities, they just they run the campaign by themselves. So all these lessons learned in more detail are presented in this replication package we've written in Eccentric. It is available in the events website in the link below, and it contains a little bit more information about the actual implementation, the business models, and a little bit of more numbers around it. I won't take more time because I want to give the floor also to my colleague Stella from Turku, who's going to speak about MAS and other measures in Eccentric. So thank you from my side. Here are my contact details and also my colleagues' contact details in the city of Stockholm, and we are happy to take questions now or later on. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Maria-Angelina. Yes, I'd like to welcome Stella as well now to give her presentation, and then we'll take any questions for both presentations together. So Stella is the Eccentric site manager for the city of Turku and work package leader for mobility as a service, so very well qualified to give us an update on that, on the work in the city on that measure. So thanks for joining us, Stella.
Yes, I hope that my presentation is visible for all of you. Thank you. So what I will talk to you today is about mobility as a service for all and by all, and the replication potentiality of how to implement MAS in local context. I mean, what happened is that when we started CIVITAS Eccentric, mobility as a service was a really new concept. And what we did as a first instance was that we developed MAS readiness level index to describe all the areas where the MAS can be developed in a city. And in here, I will be focusing on our final publication, that is guidelines on how to implement MAS, and bring out some of the lessons learned that we have gained throughout the process, and what are the things that you could be easily replicated and have already been done by several cities in Europe. Mobility as a service is a concept which has a lot of interpretations, and that was the ground where we started from. And we realized during the 4 years process that we really need to focus on the user needs, and the user needs to be in the core of our issues. And in here I have described it as a windmill, where the user is actually the one, that focal point that everything should be rolling around the different user perspectives. A lot of development is and discussion is carried on an ecosystem, and mobility as a service is truly an ecosystem based development that needs to focus on several layers. And one thing that we learned a lot is that we really need to make the ground available for mobility as a service to flourish. And in this drawing, you can see that the ground is developed in several layers, and they are more detailed described in the publication. But I would like to focus here on two particular sides of the groundwork. The one being the resilience. The resilience of the system is now during the COVID pandemic really easily seen if the system is a risk alert to some events like pandemia now has showed us. So the really risk assessment of the whole system needs to be carried, because any kind of services that we are ensuring for users to be frequently adapting and using really needs to be trustworthy. And that means that the risk assessment of the whole groundwork needs to be done. And what was really important to showcase that actually the modularity of any kind of mobility system needs to be focused. So in the event like this, what are the different modules that need to be stressed or reduced and adapted? And for that, the city has a big role. What is really clear that when we are developing more and more IT-based systems which are discussing through interfaces, it's the interdependency of the system, and it becomes really, really fragile, because the weakest link is actually the line in between the different players that isn't working. And of course, the privacy issues are really important to take into account. And these are partly the data governance that I would like to stress in here. We are talking recently a lot about data and how the data is actually the new gold or the gold mine, but what we really need to be clear is what are the different roles in regards to data, and how the different operators, whether they are combining ticketing or separately done, what are their roles and responsibilities on customer data, sharing that and owning that, and also actually then giving it to the third parties. Here we have GDPR that came throughout the process of CIVITAS Eccentric that also gave a specific layer to this issue. So what are the different impacts that can be gained from actually focusing on the holistically on mobility as a service, not just looking at a particular IT solution, backend solution or front-end solution, is actually that we would be able to bring out satisfied customers, more visibility and more options, and actually luring different operators to the cities that might not have them yet. And it would allow us to have a change of travel behavior that is really demanding and looked after nowadays in all around Europe, because we all really need to be focusing on how the frequent travelers or how the daily routines are formulated. And of course, it would allow improved cooperation between operators and new business models to come alive. And in the long run, of course, reduction of the car dependency and vehicle kilometers traveled and overall emissions, of course, are part of the long-term solution results, and at the same time also the improved resilience of the system that is really important. So what was done in regards to mobility as a service in city of Turku? I would like to say that we were developing a lot on the groundwork and also focusing on what are the next levels. So what happened in that 2017, we created the mass readiness level indexes that is focusing on 8 different layers that you can see in the picture here, and we were actually blowing wind into the system and then looking at what are the key elements as described in the windmill model. So we were actually blowing wind, and all of those 4 areas that can be seen here actually got improvement or got further steps along the way. There's a lot still to be done, but we got the wind blowing. So what was happening? We were integrating bus tickets with events. So basically a bus ticket is valid before an event and after event as the same ticket as an event ticket. And here you can see a picture of that. And this has been first started with the city theater that was brought it up to several operations, several event operators. We integrated the bike share system into public transportation ticketing systems and actually developed the whole regional public transportation's back end so that it actually can take all the different mobility service providers on board and allow them to use their tickets as part of their solutions. We took speed on renewing our parking policies, because in many cases parking policies need to be renewed in order to get actually operational conditions for several mass operators to come to the city. And also we launched a cooperation with service providers and having a frequent discussion that enabled the visibility and shared providers to come and enter into the city of Turku, for example. And what we've seen a boom of operators coming in, and also actually a lot of mobility as a service platform operators are really interested nowadays in the city of Turku and have actually gained some recognition also on international levels. So what happens in regards to replications is that actually several cities in Europe and, for example, CIVITAS PORTIS consortium use their mass readiness level indexes as part of their process speeding up. And also we've had a lot of discussion on national level in Finland on how do we actually enable and boost the mobility as a service ecosystem. And this model is being used as one of the basic models that we are enabling cities to take their next steps. So what we consider is that actually looking at the guidelines, it gives you a really good opportunity and overview on what are the key components that a city needs to look into. And I have to really stress that the mobility as a service is really a new concept for the city, and rarely there are experts on that that can combine the mobility and transport issues together with IT and together with requirements and data. So it needs to have a really multi-sectoral development and cooperation within the city. And this offers a good guideline on actually basis for the discussion to take further. And what I'm seeing is that there's a constant need of actually understanding the mobility as a service opportunities that local authorities have and what they could actually be handling in the city, instead of actually being led by operators separately to maybe not so sustainable ways further. If you'd like to have more information or anything, please feel free to contact myself and my colleagues and have a look on the guidelines. Thank you.
thank you very much, Stella and Maria-Angelina. So I thought some really interesting points coming through the presentations there from Stockholm in terms of the city really leading an integrated approach to the charging infrastructure, both in the public space, on streets, but also at people's homes. And I think that communication can clearly be very beneficial. It could be confusing for people thinking about as to their options for charging, and providing that consistent communication, I imagine is really valuable. So thanks for providing the information on that. And also then from Stella, the points about Mars in terms of resilience and providing a service that's in the situation of the pandemic people can rely on. I mean, I'm sure that's a really big challenge, but something you're obviously working on in Turku. And then also the step-by-step approach to integration, one initiative at a time to get the basis for the Mars system in place. It's also really interesting. So short presentations, but thanks very much, really informative. We haven't yet received any questions through, but perhaps if people do have questions for Stella and Maria-Angelina, they can include those in the questions forum, and we'll come back to those after the next presentation, which will be from Dirk from TML. So I'd like to hand over to Dirk for the presentation for Portis at this point. Dirk is a traffic engineer, a mobility expert at transport and mobility for Leuven at TML, and he's been the transferability manager for CIVITAS Portis. So he's been really focusing on how the different measures implemented in Portis will be taken forward in the future. So Dirk, if you're there, I'd like to give the floor to you for the presentation of the Portis measures.
Yeah, please. I like to share my screen. Okay.
Great, thanks, Dirk.
Yeah, you see my screen? Yeah.
Yes, I can indeed.
I start a bit different in the sense that I will talk first about an interesting approach we have a lot of interest from other cities on, and then I'll go to an example of an important scaling up measure in Constanza. The reason is because in both approaches, our first approach on behavioral change is very important. Now, I think, sorry, yeah, I think after these 2 weeks, most of you know our 5 cities, and working on the different elements of port cities. They all are important urban areas with a strong interaction between the urban area and the activities of the port. And what I want to highlight today is our efforts we are doing on behavioral change. But before I do that, I want to stress the importance that all our cities really worked on the framework to implement the strong mobility measures, and especially the approach on behavioral change. And with this, I mean the fact that we all worked on a very integrated governance between city and port, and also the sustainable urban mobility plans and other planning tools to do that. We also worked, as we heard also in Eccentric, on the smart data platforms, which are extremely important to bring our knowledge together and to give it again to the people they need it, to the stakeholders and to other suppliers. Now, the approach on behavioral change is really based on the understanding that if we want to change mobility in a good way, it's important to implement strong solutions, but it's also important to convince the people to change their mindset, to change their behavior. And doing that, we all started from a strong analysis of the needs of our target groups. Understanding the people seemed to be crucial to change their mind. And therefore, this scheme shows a bit the way we work. Of course, we have a lot of solutions implemented. we have the strong partnership between the city and port, but above that, among that, we have a strong mobility brand that brings everything together in our cities, showing the people that they should change their way of traveling. And an important element is this in this aspect is the fact that we all try to understand what are the real barriers for them to change their transport mode. And you see them here, distances, weather, safety. Sometimes it's a real objective fact, but in many cases, it's also a subjective feeling. And we also want to work on this. Now, an important element in our approach is the behavioral change 7E model. In this aspect, we really try to understand how people feel, how citizens and commuters feel, what they think, and we try to have the good action at the good moment to make them change. And I won't go in detail in here, but I want to stress that, in fact, we start from the idea that we want to understand, enlighten whether they know or don't know the solution. And if they say they don't know, we try to raise awareness. When they say it's not my problem, we try to give them emotional connection. If they come in the status where they know it, but they say it's not my responsibility, we try to give them social motivation. We want to present them ambassadors, showing there is another way of just using the normal fossil-fueled car. And also we try to encourage them with external motivation, with rewards to change and to try the new solutions. We also want to give them opportunities. We want to make them the ways to test new solutions easy by organizing events, by giving them possibilities to change. But we also want to go on, and then we are in the level of amplify. We give them good examples, strong examples that show this is really the way they can change their behavior. And last but not least, we try to support them to keep on doing this, not as just one element or just one trial, but really keep on doing this to the future. And in PORTIS, we prove that applying such approaches really makes a difference. And we got already many other cities which are very interested in this approach. Now, in Antwerp, everything was coming together in the Smart Ways to Antwerp approach. This approach has a very strong brand in which we bring together all information and activities. For the different target groups, we have similar message, but in different formats to approach them in the best way. In Antwerp, they're also using important events to trigger, in fact, the change. And for Antwerp, there are the big traffic words around the city. In Antwerp, we have also the multimodal route planner, which is really different from what we have from Google and so on, because we really promote sustainable alternatives for the cars. In fact, putting the car in its sustainable role, assisting the other modes. And maybe last but not least, it's important that we include all stakeholders in this process. And a good example of this is the fact that we convinced employers in order that they should convince their employees to change their behavior. Here you see on the slide a range of examples of the campaigns organized in Antwerp. And as you see, we try to be creative and to give the good message on the good moment. I think be the change. It's a small step for you and a big jump for Antwerp to really attract people to make the change. Now, of course, the city is very concerned about the impact of the initiatives they take. And for that, a lot of services are done all the time. Services, especially to the different target groups. the workers, people going to school, and the leisure. And as you see on the scheme, year after year, we succeed to decrease the share of car use and to increase the sustainable modes. The same approach we have in Aberdeen. Not the same, of course, but using the same idea, the same concept. Here we have the Get About mobility brand, which is not only covering the city, but also the Aberdeenshire, which makes it possible with a specific segmentation of the target groups, allowing to give consistent marketing campaigns, but on the other hand, tailored messages for the audience. And that makes the approach very efficient, also allowing to really engage all the groups in society and especially focus on the inclusion of maybe the vulnerable people in our society. Especially in Aberdeen, a lot of efforts are done to achieve this. Also in Aberdeen, we have the employers really approaching the employees to make the change, and a strong cooperation with health services. We have the route planner, Go to Aberdeen, and there it's important to mention that the design of this route planner was also really driven by the knowledge on what students, drivers, all the people are doing, and also the way we can help them to make them change. In fact, the slogan used, think about behavior change as a product, really summarize the approach in Aberdeen. Now, in Aberdeenshire, this approach was translated into specific actions and approaches to the different towns around the city. And here, I just want to stress two elements. Understanding the people in our target area was an important element. We really questioned ourselves, what exactly want the people living there? Who are the people living there? How can we change their mind? And what initiative we really have to take to make the difference? Now, also Aberdeen is doing a lot of efforts to monitor their efforts. And you see here, for instance, the cycling to school raised in an important way the last years. And when we bring all these figures together, this really validates the expectations to come through use of active modes and collective transport for more than 40% of the trips in the coming years. So that's an important observation, and that's an important goal we're really going to achieve with the approach we have here in Portis. Now, talking about taking up in Portis, a lot of efforts were done to do that in a very active way. At first level, a lot of transferability sheets are developed. They are partly in use already, but at the end of the project, they will be available in the different websites and by other means. But also a lot of other activities were done, training sessions, knowledge exchange, and the port workshops, where we especially approach the ports, because as I started, we have the city and the port. And an important element is that they are both aware of the fact that they both should work together to make the change, to change the travel behavior of their people. Now, coming back to Portis itself, here you see an overview of all the measures implemented in the project, and also an overview of the plans that will be continued, the plans that are really implemented. So you see, not all of them could have been implemented, but many of them were upscaled geographically already, and also a lot were upscaled to new target groups. A very interesting example here is the situation in Constanza concerning the parking strategy, or I should say differently, giving the urban space back to the citizen. In Constanza, we had a challenge that the urban area of Constanza was really overloaded by cars taking most of the public space. there was no real respect for parking rules. Most citizens took it for granted that the car was everywhere, and the pedestrian and cycle networks were rather weak. This situation became even worse because the number of vehicle ownership is growing a lot the recent years, which makes the challenge even harder. Now, starting with Portis, a lot of steps were set. In 2018, we had the Sustainable Urban Mobility Plan for the Gropol Constanza. But maybe more important for this approach is the parking policy for the city, approved by the city local council, especially prepared by the Portis team. And this was also done by a strong communication strategy elaborated and accepted by the Mobility Forum. This Mobility Forum also set up in the framework of Portis. Now, as part of this, a lot of small strategic changes in the cities were done. First, a small pilot in one street, and then an overall realization to protect everywhere the sidewalks with bollards against the car. Constanza started with one street, and finally they gave, in short term, 35,000 square meters back to the pedestrian, protected against the car. And in this time, also a plan of reallocation the street space in the city center of Constanza was developed, and many other changes were implemented. And from this side, you see that the visibility and the space for the cyclists and pedestrians was already increased a lot, as you see on the picture on the slide. Together with this approach, there was also an important awareness campaign going on, in fact, in 3 stages. You see here some slogans: choose the bike, choose the bus, walk, it's simple and healthy. And in this way, we really changed the mindset on mobility. In fact, we turned around the triangle of mobility, where we put the cyclists and the pedestrian first, which was completely the upside down situation in relation to the situation before Portis. And now I think scaling up this, it started already, but we believe that in this way, the situation in Constanza looks even brighter, as I'm showing it now, because we will have a further extension of the reallocation plan to cover the whole urban area. We have the pedestrian area in the city center that will be enlarged a lot. But maybe more important, we have the mentality shift of the citizens and the local decision takers on mobility. Now, the cyclists, public transport, and pedestrians are coming first. And maybe the profile here of the 4 main corridors that will be reorganized in the coming years is really showing there, where you see that the number of lanes for cars are really turned into a very limited number of 1 through lane and 1 lane for the turning movements, instead of the 4 lanes in each directions we had before. So I would say thank you for listening to the Portis story here, and I hope I gave you a first overview of what CIVITAS is important. Okay, Tim.
Thank you very much, Dirk. Yeah, thanks for your presentation there again. I think just some quick reflections in terms of the behavioural change measures then from Antwerp. It's really impressive to see what's been achieved there, and if people are more interested in those measures further, then there's also a recording of a behavioural change human dimension webinar where further details of those measures from Aberdeen and Antwerp were presented, and that's available on the CIVITAS Portis website as well. And then yeah, I think in terms of the scheme in Constanza, it's incredible what's being achieved in the cities with these major changes in the streetscape, giving space to people for active mobility and for the bus services to run through the city as well. So thanks for outlining that and how that has that's being progressed by the city beyond Portis as well, with further schemes in the pipeline. I would like to move now to the questions as well. We've had one question which wasn't which was maybe prompted by the comment from Panos about electric buses on Gran Canaria, first of all. So I'd like to just cover that one, and then maybe we'll come back to our panel discussion as well in the time we have remaining. So first of all, the question came from Matthew Lesh. Perhaps all the presenters could join me on screen again. So the question for the panelists, and we have many cities present, so maybe they're aware of something. Are there any experiences with the repowering of older buses to electric drive buses basically to improve overall electrification and reach climate goals? So it's a question of refurbishing buses. So I'm not sure from my memory if we had a specific measure on this in the CIVITAS Living Labs, but perhaps you're aware of an experience from your city or elsewhere that we can share with Matthew. Oh, Panos, you have something?
No, the answer is no. For destinations, the big challenge is even to employ electric buses away from the mainland because of complex maintenance and parts supply issues. The suppliers of these buses do not have permanent installations on the islands. So you understand that it is complex already to use electric buses on islands, and particularly smaller islands, let alone repowering them. To repower them, you would have to ship them back to the mainland, do something there, and that becomes quite expensive and is not financially viable because you have an old frame, old suspension, old brakes, and you put a new motor in it. And these buses, they can do 100,000, 150,000 kilometers a year. So the island's position was that it was not worth it. Too expensive, too technically complex, very much in favor of brand new buses.
Thank you, Panos, for the insights on that, in particular in the context of small islands. You certainly sparked curiosity of mine as well with this question, and perhaps we'll receive some feedback from others, participants, if they've heard of anything in the questions segment there. But I'd like to move on to the panel discussion aspect. We have around 10 minutes left of the session today. So first of all, we've been talking about the scaling up of measures, of certain measures at the Living Lab cities. And clearly the cities have taken a leading role often in these projects, but the other actors have been involved, and it's interesting to explore the role of people as other actors and stakeholders as we look to scale up these measures further. So first of all, looking towards the aspect of public endorsement of these measures and citizen engagement, I'd like to put a question first of all to Dirk in the context of the Constanza scaling up of boulevard refurbishment and reprioritization of street space. Clearly, that type of measure can raise controversy with different groups. So what has Constanza been doing in order to bring people along with this idea and to encourage people to shift their mentality on this aspect?
Yeah, as you saw already in the presentation, Constanza really changed their approach there. Before Portis, there was no real habit to have this type of discussion with the citizens, with the stakeholders, and this all changed. They organized a mobility forum, and in this mobility forum they brought stakeholders together, representatives of groups of society, and they start discussing everything, and they created really awareness. Now I'm specifically talking about this parking and the sidewalks, awareness of the fact that this is not the right situation. And in this way, they created really a change in the mindset by talking to people, by organizing service, by organizing a lot of events. and also debates over the situation. And I remember in the beginning when we were there was this problem that if the policeman had to do the enforcement, there was not enough acceptance for this enforcement. But after 2 years, this acceptance was there. And this was a rolling thing by better acceptance, better enforcement, and yeah, and this created this new situation.
Thank you, Dirk. So it's really been a change in the way that the public is engaged in Constanța, and yeah, very promising. Yeah, thanks very much. It's yeah, it's really exciting initiatives going forward in the city there. Just moving on to political will as well. Clearly, these are ambitious cities that have joined these projects in the first instance, and there's been political support to undertake these pilots. But I was interested to know if there have been sort of particular measures which have sparked extra enthusiasm from politicians involved, and therefore that they're continuing with the scaling up of these measures. Perhaps I could ask that question first of all to Panos in relation to destinations, whether he's seen examples of where this political motivation has grown through the projects.
Yes, Tim. Thank you for the question. First of all, let me say that I only had the opportunity to present only 4 out of the 79 measures of destinations. But I can assure you that for us as well, behavioral change was one of the major objectives of the project, including the behavioral change of the arriving tourists as well. So to come back to the political support, early on in the project, in the fall of 2016, we established in the project the political steering committee that includes the mayors and councillors for all 7 cities involved in the project. The political steering committee has remained very active in the project. And this political support we felt was absolutely necessary for the success of our 79 measures. And indeed, they did help a lot. And at the end, just about a year and a half ago, the initiative of the mayors was to develop a political declaration. It was signed in Elba in April 2019, and was delivered to the then Commissioner of Transport, Violeta Bulk, in Antwerp in a joint meeting with Portis in June 2019. So our politicians have been instrumental in the success of the project and have also been very much involved. 2 of them are members of the Political Action Committee of the CIVITAS Forum. So we felt that without them, we wouldn't have been as successful as we have been.
Great. Okay, so it's really been a driving force in the project, yes, and obviously, yes, there's a great commitment for them to continue through their participation in the CIVINETs and within the CIVITAS, yes, community.
To see the mayor of Rethymno on an electric scooter going around his job of advertising sustainable mobility in the city is quite a phenomenon. Very pleasant surprise for some people, but for us it shows the commitment of that mayor. You know, he's the same one that introduced the first electric bus in Crete and in Greece, for that matter, overcoming significant regulatory obstacles, and has also triggered significant private investment for 300 e-bikes in the city. So the mayors have been in the forefront of our work.
Excellent. Thanks, Panos, for that. Yeah. And then just moving on to the final area regarding private sector involvement, I'd just like to ask Maria Angelina regarding the you talked about the EV charging, and clearly you mentioned there's been involvement of the utility providers, and it really is a cross-sectoral challenge looking at electrification, both from the energy provision and then providing charging infrastructure within the city, but also at homes. I'm just wondering how you see the city's role evolving, and whether you feel that the private sector is really helping you now to promote EV take-up across the city.
Thank you for the question. Well, how we did it in Stockholm is that we saw the role of the city as providing access to, for example, public space, public streets, to utility operators in order to be able to provide charging infrastructure, and it's then the utility providers that take up the costs for setting up and maintaining, operating, and also the responsibility to deliver. So this has been our approach to basically give the tools to the private sector to undertake the investment. There are many municipalities in Europe that they find it really expensive to invest themselves, and this is not the way we think it's best to do, because we have charging operators, utility providers. They have the solutions and they are ready to invest, provided that they know where and how. So this has been our approach. Otherwise, we know there are other cities that go for public procurement, for instance. There is another way to do, and there are many ways to do. We thought that for our specific regulatory case, the access rights agreements worked best. So this is why we have done it this way.
Okay, thanks very much. So it's really highlighting the enabling role in this case, and not that the city should be investing itself heavily in the infrastructure, but providing the framework. So thanks very much for your comments on that. So finally, as well, it's been within the projects. It's been the role of the living labs to also spread their knowledge to other cities, which is part of what we're doing today, of course, but then also there have been other initiatives. So I'd just like to, we've just got a couple of minutes left, so I'd just like to go quickly around to ask you from each of the projects what's been the most successful approach you've had for sharing with cities. So we'll just start with Dirk, first of all, from Portis. Just a quick comment there, Dirk, on how you
very quickly, I gave an overview of the actions done in Portis on this, but maybe I think the cooperation program with different cities, in which there was an active interaction between two cities looking to the familiar and the common challenges, maybe I think that's the most successful when we really want to come to operational plans to take up the same measure. And that's what's going to happen these last months of the project. 3 and 4 cities that will make operational plans for measures that are also implemented in Portis. There was a delay, and it isn't that efficient because of Corona, but I think in general that's an important way to do it.
Thanks. Thanks, Dirk. So those cooperation meetings are coming up with other cities during October and November. Okay, thanks. And just to Stella quickly as well for Eccentric, how have you been taking forward replication?
Yeah, what we have been establishing is an observer cities cycle that have been actually then really involved in city visits, and we've been openly discussing in several meetings with them, and they've been developing upscaling plans and replication plans that are now published also. So it's a really good concept that you're actually aiming towards something that's replicating. And what I would like to also highlight in here is that we had 50 measures in CIVITAS Eccentric, so we learned a lot from each other and actually are then able to multiply and replicate things on a regional level and scale up them also nationally. So actually the multiplying effects are on several layers, and this is often ignored, but actually the regional and national levels are really important to really speed up the process. And if there would have been more time, we could have replicated more from actually destinations and Portis also. So I mean, in cross-cutting issues are also important to identify.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, that point about national spreading of the measures is really interesting as well. Thanks, Stella. And just finally to Panos on that question, just to conclude for today's session, how's Destinations been promoting its work and sharing its knowledge with other cities?
Yes, I made reference to this, Tim, in my presentation. We thought that the most successful tool that we developed early on in the project was the platform of followers. With 220 registrations, it became the ambassador, it became the catalyst, it became the springboard to launch our replication activities. And of course, many of the applicants that expressed interest in replication came from this group of 220 people. And we still keep the platform open. We continue the replication activities until the end of the project, despite the fact that, as you know, the tourism sector collapsed completely in 2020. And that presented huge challenges for our project, for the completion of certain of our measures, but it did not reduce the interest of many cities outside the project to replicate and learn and share experiences with us.
Great. Thanks, Panos. So, yeah, even in the current circumstances, there's a huge desire for people to understand what we've been working on in these projects, and that's great, and let's hope it continues. So we really have to bring this session to an end now. There will be the closing session starting at 4 o'clock, where the project coordinators from each of the Living Lab projects will be sharing their key points and lessons learned with Isabel van Doorn from DG Move. So that will be starting at 4 o'clock using the same link. So please stay on the line, but enjoy a very short break, and we'll see you back at 4 o'clock. So thanks very much to the presenters, and we'll see you all soon.
Thank you very much, Tim.
Thank you.
Yeah.